Zara Adams froze when she first laid eyes on him, her breath catching in her throat as he strode through the doors of Bennett Publishing with an air of authority that commanded attention from everyone in the room. She wasn't supposed to be affected by him. She'd promised herself long ago that she wouldn't be swayed by men in expensive suits who thought they owned the world. But there was something different about this one. Mr. Novak Valentine, her boss, Patricia, announced with a reverence Zara had never heard from her before. The new owner of Bennett Publishing. Zara nearly dropped the stack of manuscripts she was carrying. New owner? No one had mentioned anything about the company being sold. But as she watched Novak Valentine make his way across the office, greeting employees with a firm handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, she realized her quiet life at the publishing house was about to change dramatically. At 28, Zara had carved out a comfortable niche for herself as a senior editor at Bennett, one of New York's most respected independent publishing houses. She loved discovering new authors, nurturing their talent, and helping bring stories to life. The modest salary was enough for her small Brooklyn apartment and the occasional splurge on new books. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Now, as Novak Valentine approached her desk, his steel-gray eyes scanning her with an intensity that made her straighten her posture, she wondered if everything she'd built was about to crumble. "Ms. Adams," he said, extending his hand. His voice was deep and smooth, like aged whiskey. "I've heard impressive things about your editing skills." Zara hesitated before accepting his handshake, surprised that he knew who she was. "Thank you, Mr. Valentine. I wasn't aware we were being sold." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Most weren't. I prefer to handle acquisitions quietly." "Is that what we are? An acquisition?" She couldn't keep the edge from her voice, and immediately regretted it. Antagonizing the new billionaire owner on day one probably wasn't the wisest career move. Instead of anger, though, his lips curved into what appeared to be a genuine smile. "You're passionate about this place. Good. That's what I'm looking for." Before she could respond, he was whisked away by Patricia toward the conference room where the rest of the executive team waited. Zara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her hand still tingling from where his had gripped it. "Can you believe it?" whispered Lucy, her assistant editor, appearing beside her desk with wide eyes. "Novak Valentine, the billionaire tech genius who's been buying up media companies left and right. And he actually spoke to you." "Lucky me," Zara muttered, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. She turned back to her computer screen, determined not to be distracted by Novak Valentine or his perfectly tailored suit, or the way his presence seemed to electrify the air around him. She had a manuscript to edit, authors to email, and a career to protect. The last thing she needed was to develop any kind of feelings for her new boss, especially one known for his ruthless business tactics and revolving door of model girlfriends. That evening, Zara stayed late, deliberately waiting until most of her colleagues had left. She needed time to process the day's events, and the quiet of the nearly empty office helped her think. She was deep in concentration, red pen in hand as she marked up a promising new thriller manuscript when a shadow fell across her desk. "Do you always work this late, Ms. Adams?" Zara jumped, looking up to find Novak Valentine leaning against the doorframe of her small office, his tie loosened and jacket slung over one shoulder. He looked more approachable like this, but no less intimidating. "Only when there's important work to be done," she replied, setting down her pen, which seems to be always. He moved into her office without waiting for an invitation, settling into the chair across from her desk with casual grace. "Tell me about this manuscript that's keeping you here past 8 on a Friday night." Zara hesitated. In her experience, corporate owners cared about profit margins, not the creative content. But there was something in his expression, genuine curiosity, perhaps that made her want to share. It's a debut novel from a young author I discovered at a writer's conference. The plot needs work, but her voice is extraordinary, raw, honest, and completely original. Zara paused, realizing she was rambling. Sorry, I tend to get passionate about the books I believe in. Don't apologize for passion, he said, leaning forward slightly. It's refreshing. Their eyes met, and Zara felt an unexpected connection, a spark of something that made her heart beat faster. She quickly looked away, busying herself with organizing the papers on her desk. I should probably head home, she said, suddenly aware of how alone they were in the office. Novak nodded, standing up. I have a car waiting downstairs. Let me give you a ride. That's not necessary. I take the subway. It's late and I'm headed to Brooklyn myself. It's no trouble. His tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. 20 minutes later, Zara found herself in the back of a sleek black Bentley, sitting closer to Novak Valentine than she ever expected to be. The leather seats were butter soft, and the privacy partition was up, giving them an intimacy that made her nervous. So why publishing? He asked, turning slightly toward her. With your skills, you could be making twice as much in many other industries. Not everything is about money, Mr. Valentine. Novak, please. He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes, transforming his face from merely handsome to almost breathtaking. And you're right. But I'm curious about what drives you. Zara considered deflecting but decided on honesty instead. Books saved me when I was young. My mother died when I was 12, and my father, well, he checked out emotionally. Books became my escape. My education, my friends. I want to help create that for others. She hadn't meant to reveal so much, but something about the quiet car and his attentive gaze had lowered her defenses. I'm sorry about your mother, he said softly. Thank you. Zara shifted the conversation away from herself. What about you? Why buy a publishing house when your empire is built on technology? A shadow crossed his face. Let's just say I have my reasons. The car slowed to a stop outside her apartment building, a modest pre-war structure that stood in stark contrast to what she imagined were his usual surroundings. Thank you for the ride, she said, reaching for the door handle. Zara. Her name on his lips made her pause. I'd like your help with something. A project I've been considering for Bennett. Would you be willing to meet tomorrow? I can send the car for you at noon. She should say no. Meeting with the billionaire owner on a Saturday was bound to start rumors, but curiosity got the better of her. What kind of project? One I think you'll find interesting. Bring your appetite, I'll have lunch prepared. Against her better judgment, Zara nodded. All right. Noon tomorrow. As the car pulled away, she stood on the sidewalk watching its taillights disappear around the corner. What had she just agreed to? And why did the thought of seeing Novak Valentine again tomorrow make her stomach flip with anticipation? True to his word, the car arrived at precisely noon the next day. Zara had spent the morning overthinking her outfit, finally settling on dark jeans, a silk blouse, and ankle boots. Professional enough for a work meeting, but not so formal that it seemed like she was trying too hard. The driver, a man named James with a kind smile and salt and pepper hair, greeted her by name. Mr. Valentine is looking forward to your meeting, Miss Adams. Zara tried to ignore the flutter in her chest at his words. Where exactly are we going? To Mr. Valentine's home in Brooklyn Heights. His home, not his office. The information sent a fresh wave of nerves through her. She'd assumed they'd be meeting at a restaurant or perhaps his Manhattan office. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a stunning brownstone on one of the most prestigious streets in Brooklyn Heights. The historic facade gave little hint of what lay inside, but as James led her up the steps and the door swung open, Zara found herself in a space that perfectly blended historic charm with modern luxury. Zara, Novak greeted her, appearing from what looked like a home office. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a light gray Henley that somehow made him look even more attractive than he had in his business suit. "Welcome, thank you for coming. Your home is beautiful," she said, taking in the high ceilings and the wall of windows at the back that overlooked a lush garden. "It's one of my favorite places," he replied, gesturing for her to follow him. "I had lunch set up on the terrace. The weather's too nice to be inside." The terrace was a secluded oasis, with climbing ivy, potted trees, and comfortable seating. A table had been elegantly set for two, with a spread of gourmet sandwiches, salads, and a bottle of sparkling water chilling in an ice bucket. As they sat down, Zara decided to get straight to the point. "So, what's this project you wanted to discuss?" Novak served her some food before answering. "I'm considering launching a new imprint at Bennett, one focused on untold stories, voices that don't typically get published, perspectives that challenge the status quo." Zara's interest was immediately piqued. "That sounds exactly like what the industry needs right now." "I thought you'd say that." He looked pleased. "I want you to head it." She nearly choked on her water. "Me? But I'm not an executive. I'm just an editor." "You're not just anything, Zara. You have impeccable taste, a keen eye for talent, and based on what I've learned, authors trust you. You're perfect for this." She was speechless. It was the kind of opportunity editors dreamed about, the chance to build something from the ground up, to truly make a difference in what got published. "Why me?" she finally asked. "You barely know me." Novak's expression turned thoughtful. "I do my research. I've read every book you've edited in the last 5 years. I've spoken to authors you've worked with. Your reputation precedes you." The idea that he had been researching her work so thoroughly was both flattering and unsettling. "When did you start this research?" "About 6 months ago, when I first considered acquiring Bennett." 6 months. He'd been watching her work for 6 months without her knowledge. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. "This isn't just about business for you, is it?" she asked, studying him. "There's something personal here." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by a guarded expression. "What makes you say that?" "The way you talk about untold stories. There's passion there." She leaned forward slightly. "What's your untold story, Novak?" For a moment she thought he might actually tell her, but then the mask of the polished businessman slipped back into place. "We're here to talk about your future, not my past." "What do you say? Will you take on the imprint?" Zara wanted to press further, intrigued by what he might be hiding, but she knew better than to push. "I'd need details. Budget, timeline, creative control." "Of course." He seemed relieved by her shift back to business. "I have a preliminary proposal for you to review." As lunch progressed, they discussed the potential imprint in detail. Novak was offering her substantial resources, a team of her choosing, and most importantly, the freedom to pursue the kinds of books she believed in. It was everything she could have asked for professionally. Yet, as she listened to him outline his vision, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Novak Valentine than met the eye. The billionaire businessman with the perfect life seemed to be hiding something vulnerable beneath his polished exterior. And despite her determination not to be charmed by him, she found herself increasingly drawn to the glimpses of the man behind the billions. Over the next few weeks, Zara found herself working closely with Novak to bring the new imprint to life. They decided to call it Perspective Press, and Zara threw herself into developing its identity and acquiring its first list of titles. The work was exhilarating, challenging her in ways her previous position never had. But even more challenging was navigating her growing attraction to Novak. Every meeting left her more confused than the last. Sometimes he was all business, focused and somewhat distant. Other times, he'd reveal something personal, like his love for classic literature or his habit of staying up late to watch old films that made him seem so much more accessible, so much more human than his public persona suggested. One evening, they were working late in his home office, finalizing the press release for Perspective's launch. Zara was exhausted but pleased with what they'd accomplished. "I think we've got it," she said, saving the document. "This feels right." Novak nodded, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied expression. "It does. You've done remarkable work, Zara." "We've done remarkable work," she corrected him. Despite her initial reservations, they'd proven to be a good team. Her creative vision balanced perfectly with his strategic thinking. "Are you hungry?" he asked suddenly. "I could make us something." Zara raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" "Don't look so surprised." He laughed, a genuine sound that she'd come to treasure for its rarity. "I live alone. I had to learn." "All right then. Impress me." In the kitchen, Zara watched as Novak moved with unexpected confidence, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator and pantry. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong forearms as he began chopping vegetables for what he promised would be the best pasta you've ever tasted. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "Italy. I lived there for a year after college, before I started my first company." He added garlic to a pan, the aroma filling the kitchen. "My landlady was an incredible cook who took pity on the skinny American who subsisted on takeout. She made it her mission to teach me." Zara tried to picture a young pre-billionaire Novak in an Italian kitchen. "I can't imagine you ever being skinny." He laughed again. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Zara Adams." "Whose fault is that? You're not exactly an open book." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. For a moment she thought he might say more, might finally let her see behind the carefully constructed facade he maintained. But instead, he turned back to the stove. "Some stories aren't meant to be told over pasta," he said lightly, but she could hear the tension underneath. They ate at the kitchen island, the pasta indeed living up to his claims. The conversation drifted to safer topics, books they loved, places they'd traveled, their shared passion for old movie theaters. It felt dangerously like a date, especially when their hands accidentally touched reaching for the breadbasket, and neither pulled away immediately. "Why aren't you married?" The question slipped out before Zara could stop herself, fueled perhaps by the wine and the intimate setting. Novak looked surprised, then thoughtful. "The right person never came along. Or maybe she did, and I was too focused on building my empire to notice." He studied her face for a moment. "What about you? No serious relationship?" "Not for a while." She twirled pasta around her fork, avoiding his gaze. "My last relationship ended badly. He wanted someone who would be content playing the supportive girlfriend while he pursued his ambitions. I wanted a partner who valued mine equally." "His loss," Novak said quietly. The moment hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Zara knew she should leave, should maintain the professional boundary between them. But something kept her rooted to the spot, wanting to prolong the evening. "I should go," she finally said, standing up. "It's getting late." Novak nodded, walking her to the door. "I'll have James drive you home." "I can take a car service." "It's not necessary to, Zara," he interrupted gently. "Let me make sure you get home safely." The concern in his voice warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you for dinner. Thank you for your help with the press release, and for being willing to take a chance on this imprint." He paused, then added, "And for making me laugh. It doesn't happen often these days." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to her cheek. It was brief, barely there, but it sent electricity coursing through her entire body. "Good night, Zara," he said softly. In the car on the way home, Zara touched her cheek where his lips had been, wondering what she was getting herself into. She wasn't supposed to be developing feelings for Novak Valentine. He was her boss, a billionaire with a world so different from hers. And yet, as the car glided through the nighttime streets of Brooklyn, she couldn't deny the truth. She was falling for him, against all her better judgment. The launch party for Perspective Press was held at an elegant rooftop venue in Manhattan, with panoramic views of the city's skyline. The literary world had turned out in force, curious about Novak Valentine's foray into publishing and the mysterious new imprint that promised to change the conversation. Zara wore a midnight blue dress that she'd splurged on for the occasion, her normally unruly hair tamed into elegant waves. As she circulated through the crowd, accepting congratulations and introducing the authors in their inaugural lineup, she couldn't help searching the room for Novak. He'd been tied up in meetings all day and had texted that he might be late to the party. It had been a week since their dinner at his home, a week of professional interactions that gave no hint of the moment they'd shared. Zara had begun to wonder if she'd imagined the tension between them. "You've done an amazing job," a voice said behind her, and she turned to find Patricia, her former boss, smiling at her. "When Novak told me he was promoting you to run this imprint, I had my doubts not about your talent, but about whether you were ready for the political games at this level. I'm glad to be proven wrong." "Thank you," Zara replied, genuinely touched. "That means a lot. He speaks very highly of you, you know. I've never seen Novak Valentine so impressed by anyone." Patricia gave her a knowing look. "Just be careful, Zara. Men like him, they live in a different world." Before Zara could respond, a murmur went through the crowd, and she knew without turning that Novak had arrived. She felt his presence before she saw him, a sixth sense that had developed over their weeks of working together. When she did turn, the sight of him took her breath away. He was impeccably dressed in a black suit that fit him perfectly, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd run his hand through it. But it was the intensity in his eyes as they found hers across the room that made her heart race. He made his way to her, stopping occasionally to shake hands with important guests. But his gaze kept returning to her, as if drawn by a magnet. "You look stunning," he said when he finally reached her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You're late," she replied, trying to sound professional despite the blush she could feel rising to her cheeks. "Unavoidable meetings. But I'm here now." He looked around at the successful event in progress. "You've done brilliantly, Zara. Everything I knew you would be." "We should mingle," she said, suddenly aware of the eyes on them. "People are expecting you to make the rounds." He offered his arm. "Then let's mingle together." For the next hour, they moved through the party as a team, Zara introducing Novak to the authors she'd signed, Novak charming investors and industry veterans with his vision for the imprint. They worked in perfect synchronicity, anticipating each other's thoughts and seamlessly continuing each other's sentences. More than one person commented on what a good match they made. As the evening began to wind down, Novak touched her elbow lightly. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." He led her away from the main party, through a door that opened onto a smaller, private terrace. The sounds of the celebration dimmed, replaced by the ambient noise of the city and the soft strains of music drifting up from somewhere below. "What are we doing out here?" Zara asked, though she wasn't entirely sure she wanted the answer. Novak reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I have something for you, a token of appreciation for everything you've accomplished." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm, a book, its pages eternally open. "Novak, I can't accept this," she said automatically, even as her fingers itched to touch it. "You can, and you will." He took the bracelet from the box. "It's not an extravagant gift, Zara, just something to commemorate what you've built." He held out his hand, waiting, and after a moment's hesitation, she extended her wrist. His fingers were warm against her skin as he fastened the clasp, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's beautiful." "Like you," he replied, his gaze holding hers. The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity, and Zara knew they were approaching a point of no return. If she let this happen, if she crossed this line with him, everything would change. "Novak, Zara," he interrupted, taking her hands in his. "I know this is complicated. I'm your boss, technically. There's a power imbalance that can't be ignored, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day we met. And I hope you feel something too." She should deny it. She should step back, maintain the professional relationship that was safer for both of them. But standing there under the stars, with the man who had come to mean so much to her in such a short time, Zara couldn't bring herself to lie. "I do," she admitted quietly. "But that doesn't make it a good idea." "No," he agreed, surprising her. "It doesn't. Which is why I want to be completely transparent with you. No secrets. No power plays. Just two people seeing where this might go." He reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch sending shivers down her spine. "I want to kiss you, Zara. I've wanted to since that night in my kitchen. But I won't, unless you're sure." The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the sounds of the city fading away. Zara knew she was standing at a crossroads. The sensible choice would be to step back, to keep things professional. But her heart was pulling her in another direction entirely. "I'm sure," she whispered. And then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing intensity as she responded to him. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, and she wound her arms around his neck, giving herself over to the kiss she'd been imagining for weeks. It was better than she'd dreamed, tender yet passionate, making her feel desired and cherished all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Novak rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for a very long time." "Me too," she admitted, a smile tugging at her lips. "Have dinner with me tomorrow," he said. "A proper date, not a working dinner. Just you and me. Getting to know each other outside of Bennett and perspective." "Yes," she agreed, knowing she was stepping into uncharted territory but unable to resist the pull between them. As they rejoined the party, careful to maintain a professional distance, Zara caught sight of her reflection in a window, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, the silver bracelet gleaming on her wrist. She looked like a woman falling in love, which was exactly what she was afraid was happening. She wasn't supposed to love him. Novak Valentine was her boss, a billionaire who lived in a world so different from her own. But as he glanced at her across the room, a private smile curving his lips, she knew it might already be too late to protect her heart. Their first official date was at a small Italian restaurant in the West Village, the kind of place that had no sign outside and required knowing someone to get a reservation. Novak had chosen it because it offered privacy, away from the prying eyes of the publishing world and the business media that often tracked his movements. "How did you find this place?" Zara asked as they were led to a secluded corner table, the restaurant's warm atmosphere immediately putting her at ease. "The owner's son was one of my first employees," Novak explained, pulling out her chair. "When he wanted to leave tech to help his father expand the restaurant, I backed him. They've been kind enough to always keep a table for me since then." It was these glimpses into his life, the quiet generosity, the loyalty to people who had been part of his journey that continued to surprise her. The public image of Novak Valentine, ruthless business magnate, didn't align with the man who remembered their server's name and asked after his children. Over exquisite pasta and rich red wine, they began to truly get to know each other beyond work. Zara told him about growing up in a small town in upstate New York, her childhood dreams of becoming a writer herself, before discovering she had a talent for helping others shape their stories instead. Novak shared stories of his college days, when he'd built his first app in a dorm room, never imagining it would lead to the empire he now commanded. "What about your family?" she asked, noticing he'd mentioned college friends and early business partners, but never parents or siblings. A shadow crossed his face, and he took a sip of wine before answering. "My father died when I was 16. Car accident. My mother. She's alive, but we're not close." Zara sensed there was much more to the story, but didn't press. "I'm sorry about your father. It was a long time ago." His tone suggested the topic was closed, at least for now. "Tell me more about your work with that new author you mentioned last week, the one writing about immigrants in Queens." She allowed the deflection, understanding that everyone had parts of themselves they kept guarded. But as dinner progressed into dessert and then coffee, she found herself sharing things she rarely talked about: her mother's illness, her father's emotional withdrawal, her own fears of vulnerability in relationships. "I've always been careful," she admitted. "After watching my dad shut down after my mom died, I promised myself I'd never be that dependent on anyone. And then, with my ex." "What happened with him?" Novak asked gently. Zara sighed. "Classic story. He said he supported my career, but when it started to take off, when I began working longer hours and getting recognition, he felt threatened. Started making passive-aggressive comments about my little books and how I was neglecting more important things, meaning him." Novak's expression darkened. "He sounds like an insecure idiot." "He was." She smiled slightly. "The breaking point came when I was nominated for an editing award. Instead of being happy for me, he scheduled a boys' weekend during the ceremony. When I called him on it, he said, and I quote, 'It's not like you're going to win anyway. Please tell me you did win.' I did. And I ended things the next day." She twisted the stem of her wine glass. "That was 2 years ago. I haven't seriously dated since." "Until now?" There was a vulnerability in his question that touched her. "Until now," she confirmed softly. As they left the restaurant, Novak took her hand, interlacing their fingers as they walked through the quiet streets of the village. It was a simple gesture, but intimate in a way that made her heart race. "Would you like to go somewhere for a nightcap?" he asked. "Actually," she said, making a spontaneous decision, "I'd like to see where you work. Your main office, not just your home office. Or Bennett." He looked surprised. "It's just a corporate building in Midtown." "It's part of who you are. I want to see it." Half an hour later, they were stepping out of the elevator on the top floor of a gleaming skyscraper, Valentine Technologies, emblazoned on the wall in sleek silver letters. The office was mostly dark, with just security lighting illuminating the space. "Impressive," Zara said, taking in the minimalist design and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of the city. "It's where I spend most of my waking hours." Novak led her through the empty workspace toward his private office at the corner of the building. "At least it was until recently." "Until recently?" "Until I started spending them with you instead." He smiled, opening the door to his office. Unlike the cool, impersonal aesthetic of the main workspace, Novak's private office revealed more of the man. One wall was lined with books, not just business and technology titles, but literature, history, biography. A vintage record player sat on a side table with vinyl albums carefully stored nearby, and most surprisingly, framed photographs dotted the surfaces. Novak with what appeared to be college friends. Novak on a mountain summit. Novak with an elderly man in a garden. "My father," he said, noticing her looking at the last photo. "That was taken about a month before he died." Zara moved closer to the photograph. The resemblance was clear, the same strong jawline and intense eyes, but in the photo both men were laughing, caught in a moment of genuine joy. "You look like him," she said softly. "He was a good man." Worked in construction his whole life, never made much money, but he taught me the value of hard work and integrity. Novak's voice was tinged with an emotion she hadn't heard from him before. Everything I've built, in some ways, was to make him proud. I'm sure he would be. Novak ran his hand along the edge of his desk, seemingly lost in thought. I'm not so sure. He valued honesty above all else, and I haven't been entirely honest with you, Zara. Her heart stuttered. What do you mean? He gestured for her to sit on the leather sofa against one wall, then joined her, maintaining a slight distance between them. I didn't buy Bennett Publishing on a whim, or purely as a business decision. I figured as much, she said carefully. Your passion for Perspective Press seemed too personal. It is personal. He took a deep breath. My father wrote a book before he died, a memoir about his life as a first-generation American, the son of Eastern European immigrants. It was raw, honest, powerful, and rejected by every publisher he sent it to. Understanding began to dawn, including Bennett. Novak nodded. Including Bennett, he received a particularly dismissive rejection letter that devastated him. He never tried to publish it again, convinced his story wasn't worth telling. So you bought the company that rejected him. The pieces were falling into place. I bought several of them, he admitted, but Bennett was special because of you. Me? Zara was confused. I wasn't even working there when your father submitted his manuscript. No, but over the past few years, you've developed a reputation for championing exactly the kind of voices that were silenced back then. I researched every editor at every publishing house that had rejected my father. You stood out as someone who might have recognized the value in his work. Zara tried to process this information. So Perspective Press is my way of making sure other stories like my father's don't get overlooked. And yes, I specifically wanted you to run it because I believed in your vision. That part wasn't a lie. He looked at her intently. But I should have told you the whole truth from the beginning. Why didn't you? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. At first, it was just business. I didn't think my personal motivations mattered. And then, as I got to know you, you were afraid I'd think you had ulterior motives for pursuing me, she finished for him. Yes. I was afraid you'd believe I was only interested in you because of perspective, not because of who you are. His voice grew softer. But the truth is, I was falling for you long before we ever discussed the imprint. The way you stood up to me that first day, unimpressed by my position or wealth, it was refreshing, intriguing. Zara absorbed his words, trying to sort through her feelings. She was surprised by his revelation, but not angry. If anything, his motivation for creating Perspective Press made her respect him more. Do you still have it? She asked. Your father's manuscript? Novak nodded. It's in my safe at home. I've never shown it to anyone. I'd like to read it someday, if you'd let me. The vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. You would? Of course. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. Thank you for telling me the truth. It doesn't change how I feel about you, Novak. If anything, it helps me understand you better. Relief washed over his features, followed by something deeper, more intense. How do you feel about me, Zara? It was her turn to be vulnerable. I'm falling in love with you, she admitted quietly, even though I told myself I shouldn't be. In answer, he pulled her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't. There was relief there, and gratitude, but mostly a consuming passion that made her head spin. His hands tangled in her hair as the kiss deepened, and she pressed herself against him, wanting to be closer. When they finally broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I'm in love with you, Zara. I think I have been since that night you challenged me in your office, refusing to be intimidated. Her heart soared at his words, even as her mind cautioned that things were moving quickly. But for once, she silenced the voice of caution, choosing instead to listen to her heart. "Take me home with you," she whispered against his lips. "I want to be with you tonight." His eyes darkened with desire, but he pulled back slightly to search her face. "Are you sure? We don't have to rush this." "I'm sure," she said, with more certainty than she'd felt about anything in a long time. "I want this. I want you." The ride to his brownstone was charged with anticipation, their hands linked on the seat between them. Occasional kisses stolen in the privacy of the car. By the time they reached his home, the need between them had built to an almost unbearable tension. They barely made it through the door before he was pulling her into his arms again, his kisses more urgent now, his hands exploring the curves of her body through her dress. Zara responded with equal fervor, tugging at his tie, unbuttoning his shirt, desperate to feel his skin against hers. They left a trail of clothing up the stairs to his bedroom, where he laid her gently on his bed, looking down at her with a mixture of desire and something that looked remarkably like reverence. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his fingers tracing a path from her collarbone to her hip. "So are you," she replied honestly. Taking in the sight of him, the broad shoulders, the lean muscle, the way he looked at her as if she were precious. What followed was a revelation. Novak was a generous lover, attentive to her responses, focused on her pleasure as much as his own. They moved together with an instinctive harmony, as if their bodies recognized something their minds were just beginning to understand, that they belonged together. Afterward, lying in his arms as their breathing returned to normal, Zara felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever. There would be complications, she knew. Dating your billionaire boss came with its own set of challenges, but in that moment, with his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, those problems seemed distant and manageable. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm happy," she answered truthfully, "and a little scared." "Scared of what?" She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Of how quickly this is happening, of how much I already care about you, of all the ways this could go wrong." Instead of dismissing her fears, he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm scared too. I've never felt this way about anyone before. It's unsettling." "So what do we do?" "We take it one day at a time," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're honest with each other, even when it's difficult. We figure out the professional boundaries we need to maintain at work. And we don't let the outside world pressure us," she added, thinking of the media attention that would inevitably come once their relationship became public. "Exactly." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We do this our way, no one else's." As she drifted off to sleep in his arms, Zara felt both vulnerable and protected, anxious and at peace. She hadn't been looking for love, especially not with someone like Novak Valentine, but sometimes, she was discovering, the heart made its own plans. The next few months were a whirlwind of professional achievements and personal joy. Perspective Press launched to critical acclaim, with its first slate of titles garnering attention from major review outlets and strong initial sales. Zara found herself profiled in publishing trade magazines and invited to speak at industry events, her vision for the imprint resonating with readers and critics alike. Meanwhile, her relationship with Novak deepened, their initial attraction evolving into something richer and more complex. They established a rhythm to their lives, weekdays often consumed by their respective work responsibilities, with evenings and weekends reserved for each other. They were careful to maintain professionalism at Bennett, but rumors inevitably circulated, especially after they were photographed holding hands at a literary event in early spring. Novak handled the press attention with the ease of someone long accustomed to public scrutiny, while Zara found it more challenging to adjust to the occasional paparazzi outside her apartment building or the speculative articles about the editor who captured the billionaire's heart. Just ignore them, Novak advised when she showed him a particularly invasive piece in a tabloid. They'll lose interest eventually. Will they? She questioned, curling up beside him on the couch in his living room, where she now spent most of her nights. You're one of the wealthiest men in the country. I doubt they'll ever completely leave you alone. True, he acknowledged, but we can control how much access we give them. And in my experience, if you don't react, they eventually move on to more interesting targets. She rested her head on his shoulder, taking comfort in his steady presence. I just don't want our relationship reduced to sensationalist headlines. It won't be, he assured her. What we have is real, Zara. What anyone else thinks or says doesn't change that. What they had was indeed real, and it was wonderful in ways Zara hadn't dared to imagine. Novak was thoughtful and passionate, challenging her intellectually while supporting her emotionally. He remembered small details: her favorite flowers, peonies, how she liked her coffee, with almond milk, no sugar, which authors she most admired. He surprised her with first editions of beloved books and took her to tiny, perfect restaurants that didn't cater to celebrities. In turn, she drew him out of the isolated world he'd created for himself, introducing him to her small circle of close friends, encouraging him to take actual vacations instead of working remotely from exotic locations. She listened when he talked about his father, and gradually, he began to open up about the more painful parts of his past. His complicated relationship with his mother, who had remarried quickly after his father's death to a man who had little interest in Novak. His struggles in the early days of his company when investors dismissed his ideas, the loneliness that had often accompanied his success. 3 months into their relationship, on a rainy Sunday morning as they lay tangled together in his bed, Novak brought up a subject they'd been tiptoeing around. "Move in with me," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "You're here most nights anyway. Make it official." Zara tensed slightly, though she'd been expecting this conversation. "I don't know, Novak." "Why not?" His fingers traced idle patterns on her back. "Give me one good reason." She rolled over to face him. "Independence. I've always had my own space, and we work together. What if we need some separation? You could keep your apartment if you want, as a workspace or a retreat." He propped himself up on one elbow. "But I want to go to sleep with you every night and wake up with you every morning. I want to build a life with you, Zara. Not just share parts of one." The sincerity in his voice melted her reservations. "Okay. Okay?" He looked surprised at her quick capitulation. "Yes, I'll move in with you." She smiled at his expression. "Don't look so shocked. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, too. I just needed to hear you say it that way." His answering smile was radiant as he pulled her closer. "I love you, too. More than I ever thought possible." Moving in together brought new dimensions to their relationship. Zara discovered that Novak was meticulously neat, but absent-minded about basic things like grocery shopping and watering plants. He learned that she needed quiet time with a book to decompress after social events, and that she was fiercely independent about certain aspects of her life, like maintaining her own bank accounts and continuing to take the subway to work sometimes, despite his offers of a car service. They had disagreements, of course. Novak's workaholic tendencies sometimes resurfaced, leading to tense discussions about work-life balance. Zara occasionally felt overwhelmed by the wealth disparity between them, especially when he casually suggested extravagant gifts or vacations that represented more money than she used to make in a year. But they were learning to navigate these differences with honesty and respect. Novak made a conscious effort to limit his work hours and be fully present when they were together. Zara became more comfortable accepting certain aspects of his lifestyle, recognizing that his generosity came from love, not a desire to control or impress her. 6 months into their relationship, as summer gave way to fall, Novak suggested they take a week off to visit his lake house in the Adirondacks. "It was my father's dream property," he explained as they drove north, leaving the city behind. "He used to take me camping near this lake when I was a kid. He always said someday he'd build a little cabin there for weekend getaways." "So you built it for him?" Zara said, understanding immediately. "I bought the land the year after he died, when I got my first significant funding round. The house came later, once I could afford to do it right." He glanced at her. "You're the first person I've ever brought here." The significance of that admission wasn't lost on her. For all his apparent openness over the past months, she knew there were still parts of himself that Novak kept guarded. Sacred spaces he rarely allowed others to enter. That he was sharing this place with her spoke volumes about how deeply he trusted her. The cabin turned out to be a stunning modern home nestled among ancient trees, with walls of glass overlooking the pristine lake. But despite its luxury, it had a warmth and character that felt genuinely personal. Filled with books and comfortable furniture that invited relaxation. They spent their days hiking through the vibrant fall foliage, reading by the massive stone fireplace, and talking late into the night about everything and nothing. Away from the pressures of work and the city, they found a new ease with each other, a deepening of the connection that had been growing between them. On their last evening at the lake, they took the small rowboat out at sunset, drifting in the golden light as the mountains cast long shadows across the water. "I never understood what my father loved so much about this place until now," Novak said, resting the oars as they floated in a secluded cove. "The peace, the sense of perspective. It changes how you see things." "How so?" Zara asked, trailing her fingers through the cool water. "In the city, surrounded by all the trappings of success, it's easy to forget what actually matters." He looked at her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "But out here, it becomes so clear. It's not the money or the business or the status. It's this moments of genuine connection, the chance to share your life with someone who truly sees you." Zara's heart swelled at his words. Recognizing the man she'd fallen in love with, not the billionaire tech mogul, but the thoughtful, vulnerable person beneath that public persona. "I want to show you something," he said, rowing them back to shore. In the house, he led her to a small study off the main living area, where a safe was built into the wall behind a painting. He entered the combination and withdrew a thick manuscript bound with a simple leather cord. "My father's book," he said, placing it carefully in her hands. "I'd like you to read it." She accepted it with the reverence such a personal artifact deserved. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "It's time. I've kept it to myself for too long." Over the next few hours, as night fell and rain began to patter against the windows, Zara read the memoir of Nicholas Valentine Sr., the story of a construction worker who had observed America through the lens of the buildings he helped create, who had raised a son alone after his wife abandoned them, who had dreamed of more but found meaning in the life he'd built with his hands. The writing was unpolished but powerful, full of keen observations and quiet wisdom. Zara could see echoes of Novak in his father's words, the same determination, the same capacity for deep feeling beneath a stoic exterior. When she finally looked up, tears in her eyes, she found Novak watching her anxiously from the doorway. "It's remarkable," she said. "He had such clarity, such heart. The publishing world missed something special when they rejected this." Relief washed over his face. "You really think so? You're not just saying that because—" "I would tell you if it wasn't good," she interrupted gently. "You know me better than that. Your father had a true gift, Novak. His story deserves to be told." "I've been thinking," he began hesitantly. "What if we published it? Through Perspective Press? Not because of who I am, but because it's the kind of voice our imprint was created to amplify. I think that would be perfect, she said, emotion thick in her voice. It's exactly what Perspective stands for: overlooked stories that matter. He crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Thank you for reading it, for understanding why it matters so much to me, for everything, really. You don't have to thank me for loving you, she said simply. He looked at her with such tenderness that it made her heart ache. Marry me. The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and yet somehow inevitable. What? She whispered, not sure she'd heard him correctly. Marry me, he repeated, more confident now. I know we haven't been together that long, and if you think it's too soon, I understand. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life than I am about you, about us. I want to build a family with you, Zara. I want to grow old with you. I want everything, the whole messy, beautiful journey with you beside me. Tears spilled onto her cheeks as the full weight of his proposal hit her. 6 months ago, she would have called this crazy, would have insisted on waiting, on being prudent. But loving Novak had taught her that sometimes the heart recognized what the mind was slower to accept, that when you found the right person, time became a different kind of measurement altogether. Yes, she said through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. His face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He'd been planning this all along, she realized, and opened it to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond set in platinum, elegant and timeless. It reminded me of you, he said as he slipped it onto her finger. Clear, brilliant, and absolutely irreplaceable. She laughed through her tears. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said about me. Get used to it, he said, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. I plan to spend the rest of my life telling you exactly how extraordinary you are. As she stood in his embrace, the rain falling softly outside and her new fiancé's heart beating steadily against hers, Zara marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She hadn't been looking for love when Novak Valentine walked into Bennett Publishing that day. She certainly hadn't expected to fall for her billionaire boss, with all the complications that entailed. But sometimes life's greatest gifts came in unexpected packages, and sometimes the person you weren't supposed to love turned out to be exactly the one you were meant to find. They were married the following spring in an intimate ceremony at Novak's lake house, with only their closest friends and family in attendance. Zara wore a simple ivory gown and carried peonies, while Novak couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him along a path strewn with flower petals. Nicholas Valentine Sr.'s memoir was published by Perspective Press a month before their wedding, under his original title, Building America. The book received glowing reviews and found an appreciative audience, vindicating both the father's talent and the son's faith in his work. As they exchanged vows beneath a canopy of newly leafed trees with the lake sparkling behind them, Zara thought about the unlikely path that had led them to this moment. How a chance meeting, a business acquisition, and a hidden manuscript had set in motion a love story neither of them had been looking for. I take you, Zara, to be my wife, Novak said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I promise to cherish your independence while offering my support, to respect your dreams as fervently as my own, and to love you completely, honestly, and faithfully, for all the days of my life. I take you, Novak, to be my husband, she replied, squeezing his hands. I promise to be your partner in all things, to challenge you when you need it, and comfort you when you don't, and to love you with my whole heart, through whatever life brings our way. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, applause and cheers erupting around them, Zara knew that they had created something rare and precious together, a love built on mutual respect, shared passion, and the courage to be vulnerable with each other. Later that evening, as they danced under the stars on the deck overlooking the lake, Novak pulled her close and whispered in her ear, "Thank you for not letting my reputation, my wealth, or my past keep you from taking a chance on me." She smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting. "Thank you for really seeing me from that very first day." "Always," he promised, pressing his forehead to hers, "for the rest of our lives." And in that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the place that had meant so much to Novak's father and now held such significance for them, Zara felt the perfect rightness of their union. She hadn't been looking for love, especially not with a billionaire who had his own complex history and motivations. But sometimes, love found you anyway, in the most unexpected places and with the most unlikely person. As they stood together under the vast canopy of stars, Novak and Zara Valentine were no longer the billionaire and the editor, no longer the boss and the employee. They were simply two people who had found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were searching for, a love that challenged them to be their best selves, that accepted their flaws and celebrated their strengths, that promised to be their sanctuary in a complicated world. And that, Zara thought as she rested her head on her husband's shoulder, was a story worth telling. 5 years later, Zara sat in the sunlit nursery of their Brooklyn Heights home, watching as Novak gently rocked their 3-month-old daughter, Lily, to sleep. Their son, Nicholas, nearly 4 now and the spitting image of his father, was sprawled on the floor nearby, meticulously building a tower with wooden blocks. "Higher, Daddy! Watch!" Nicholas called, adding another block to his increasingly precarious structure. "I'm watching, buddy," Novak assured him, his voice soft to avoid waking the baby. "That's impressive engineering." Zara smiled at the scene, her heart so full it almost hurt. The past 5 years had brought changes she could never have anticipated when she first met the intimidating billionaire who bought her publishing house. Perspective Press had grown into one of the most respected imprints in the industry, publishing voices that might otherwise have gone unheard and winning numerous awards for its groundbreaking list. Zara still ran it with passion and vision, having returned from maternity leave just a month ago, albeit with a more flexible schedule that allowed her to balance work and family. Novak had gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his tech company, appointing a trusted CEO while he remained as chairman. The shift had surprised many in the business world, but not those who knew him well. His priorities had changed, his definition of success evolving to encompass more than just professional achievements. "She's finally out," Novak whispered, carefully laying Lily in her crib. He crossed the room to join Zara on the window seat, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and pressing a kiss to her temple. "You look tired, love. Why don't you rest while they're both quiet?" She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I'm fine. Just thinking about how much has changed. How different our lives are now from when we met." "Better or worse?" he asked, a trace of his old insecurity surfacing briefly in his eyes. "Infinitely better," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "Exhausting sometimes, chaotic often, but so much better than I could have imagined." His smile was tender as he gazed at their children, Nicholas now abandoning his tower to flip through a picture book, Lily sleeping peacefully with her tiny hands curled into fists. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted quietly. "A family, a home that actually feels like a home. Someone who knows all of me and loves me anyway." "Not anyway," she corrected gently, "because of all of you. The good, the complicated, all of it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their son as he carefully turned the pages of his book, his little brow furrowed in concentration. Do you ever regret it? Novak asked suddenly. Tying your life to mine, with all the scrutiny and pressure that comes with it? Zara turned to face him, surprised by the question. Never. Not for a second. Do you? God. No. His answer was immediate and fervent. You're the best decision I ever made. You and these little ones, you're everything. She kissed him then, a soft, affirming kiss that held all the love and gratitude she felt for this man who had upended her carefully ordered life and given her something far richer in return. Their path hadn't always been smooth. There had been adjustments to make, finding the right balance between her need for independence and his instinct to provide, navigating the inevitable public interest in their relationship, learning to communicate through disagreements rather than retreating behind walls of pride or fear. There had been painful moments, too. A miscarriage before Nicholas was born had tested them both, revealing vulnerabilities neither had fully acknowledged. Novak's mother had rejected his attempts at reconciliation, even after her grandchildren were born, reopening old wounds he'd thought long healed. But through it all, they had turned toward each other rather than away, building a partnership that grew stronger with each challenge they faced together. "Daddy, Mommy, look!" Nicholas called, proudly holding up his book. "I read it all myself." "That's amazing, sweetheart," Zara exclaimed, though she knew he had likely just recited the story from memory rather than actually reading the words. "A literary genius, just like his mother," Novak said with a proud smile, rising to go examine his son's achievement. As she watched them together, Novak's dark head bent close to Nicholas's smaller one, both of them focused intently on the book. Zara felt a wave of contentment wash over her. This was her family, imperfect, sometimes messy, but bound together by a love that had surprised and transformed them all. She thought back to that first meeting in the Bennett Publishing offices. How certain she'd been that Novak Valentine represented everything she should avoid: wealth, power, emotional unavailability. She couldn't have known then that beneath his carefully constructed public image was a man capable of profound love and vulnerability. A man who would become her greatest ally and truest friend. She hadn't been looking for him. She certainly hadn't planned to love him. But in finding each other, they had each discovered versions of themselves they might never have known otherwise: stronger, more compassionate, more complete. And that, Zara reflected as she rose to join her husband and son, with their daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, was perhaps the greatest gift love could offer: the chance to become more fully yourself through the act of loving another. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was infinitely better than any she could have imagined on her own. And she wouldn't change a single moment of the unexpected journey that had brought them here together, home, and wholly, imperfectly happy.